Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. I'm the second half and better half of the Generate newsletter. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already at axios.com/newsletters. Our next guest has obviously been involved in climate for quite a while in the US and abroad. Please welcome former Vice President Al Gore.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
The last time I was on a stage with you was at a slightly different, warmer setting outside in Dubai, where, like former Secretary Kerry, you were pretty critical of the UNFCCC process, of the COP process, but you were making an effort to reform it.
Yeah.
Where is that reform effort now? Has it gotten anywhere?
No, not really. It does need to be changed. But you know, the United Nations, for all of its greatness, and I'm so happy we have it, but it was formed at a time when the great powers did not want to invest it with independent authority to make decisions and changes. You know, that's just not, that was not in the cards. And so the institution itself is structurally weak, and so it's hard to get down to the UNFCCC process and say, okay, we're going to do it differently here. But here are some of the changes that I have recommended. I think the Secretary General of the United Nations should share in the decision of which country and which COP president should be selected each year. This is the third year in a row where it's hosted by a petrostate, and I mean, it's really ridiculous. Secondly, to require unanimity for any decision. There are some other UN bodies that have a supermajority empowered to take decisions. And the decisions the world needs to make are tough enough that getting unanimity is just unrealistic. It is difficult to change. It's going to be very difficult. But I think that having a joint approval of who the host is, you know, last year when we talked in Dubai, many people felt like it was a great victory to have that language transition away from fossil fuels. I felt that way too. You know, I was among those pushing for phasing out fossil fuels, and this was as close as they could get. But now look at the agenda for this year's COP. They've completely ignored that. And 1 month after that final document was reached in Dubai, the oil and gas lobby here in the United States started running an 8-figure advertising campaign on television every night, it's still going, to convince people that it's impossible to transition away from fossil fuels. So we need changes both in the way the UN operates and in the way the private sector responds to this challenge.
Since Dubai, we've seen many examples of companies and countries backing away from their ambitious climate commitments, bowing to profit pressures or worries about a coming election. Your investment company's recent report goes into detail on this, and I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you think may be driving this, and how to get that reversed, how to get that tide turned.
Yeah. Well, thank you for mentioning Generation Investment Management. This we just put out. One of my co-founding partners, Colin LeDuc, is here. We just put out our 8th annual Sustainability Trends Report, and thank you for writing about it. You cover this issue so completely, Andrew.
I paid him to say that. Thank
well, that's it's very expensive also. But the climate crisis is a fossil fuel crisis, and the fossil fuel industry is the wealthiest and most powerful industry in the history of the world. And everywhere in the world, at the local level, the state or provincial level, the national level, and at the international level with these conferences, they fight ferociously to stop anything that would in any way reduce the consumption of fossil fuels. And they've proven they're way better at capturing politicians than capturing emissions, and they have used their legacy economic and political networks built up over the last century to really control the policymaking process to the extent that they can. The U.S. broke free of that. Under the Biden administration, we've got this huge new climate law. The money is finally getting out the door. We're seeing it make a huge difference. Some other countries have broken free, but some of the backsliding that you're asking about comes because of the opposition of the industry and their ability to use their captive politicians in red states, particularly, to say, look, if you move forward on helping to solve the climate crisis, you're not going to be able to do anything with our pension funds. They'll tell that to the banks and the large asset managers, and some of them are scared. Oh, excuse us, we didn't really mean it. And so that is one of the reasons for the backsliding. The other reason, I mean, it's hard. We still get almost 80% of all our energy from fossil fuels. There are a lot of good people trapped in bad systems, but we need systemic change. And luckily, we now have the alternatives that are better, cleaner, cheaper. And so what we need are policies to accelerate this transition. And that means we've got to counter the information warfare. I use the term loosely, I know, but it's kind of an information war being waged by the fossil fuel industry against the efforts to make these changes that are essential to safeguard the future of humanity.
Do you look at any particular economic sector or actor, in addition to the oil and gas industry, that's been backsliding significantly on this? You are, an investment. This was an investment company report. The banking sector is one interesting industry that has continued to fund fossil fuels at home and abroad, although many have pretty ambitious climate goals. Do you look to your peers in that sector to try to get them to lead?
Well, yes, and they should be leading. The financial services industry, especially the largest banks, have been reckless in continuing to put $7 trillion additional dollars into more expansion of more and more fossil fuels since the Paris Agreement. And, the people who were saying, well, these are big energy companies, they can lead this transition. Well, that's looking for love in all the wrong places, as the country music song had it. The fossil fuel companies are not going to lead the way. And these banks and financial services companies are not going to do it unless they get a lot of pressure and policy changes. They have been putting, if you take their stock buybacks into account, the largest banks have really been putting more money into business as usual instead of what they should be putting it into. The International Energy Agency under Fatih Birol has said definitively, we shouldn't have any new development of new fossil fuel resources. We have all that we need right now to get us through this transition. Most of the electricity generating capacity installed in the world last year, more than 80%, was solar and wind. We're seeing this transition, but it's not fast enough. And we need to redirect funding much faster toward the green transition.
Extreme weather events, and later this week, we may very well have Hurricane Helene making landfall in the Gulf Coast. They're making climate change a more here and now issue and hitting Americans in their wallets through the insurance industry in particular. Do you think the rising price of home insurance, be it California homeowners, Florida, even Iowa and Minnesota due to severe thunderstorms, their insurance policies, premiums are going up?
Yeah.
This is the first time in my mind when this is really a pocketbook issue for people. Do you think that'll move the needle at all, even a little bit, in a country that is so bitterly divided?
I hope it will. And yes, I do think it will. I hesitate to have a full-throated answer of yes to that simply because we saw the city of New Orleans devastated by Hurricane Katrina. We saw this city flattened in the south part of this city by Superstorm Sandy. We've seen the fires out. We've already seen so many catastrophic consequences that are exactly what the scientists predicted would occur, and yet it has not brought us across the political tipping point yet. I think that it will. I recently checked to see what percentage of Americans have been under an extreme weather alert during the first 8 months of this year. The answer, 100%. Every single person in the United States has been at one time or another this year under an extreme weather alert. And the extremes related to the climate are getting worse regularly. When I started giving my slideshows, Andrew, on climate, I would pick examples of the various impacts from 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Now, you can say, this was yesterday, this was the day before yesterday, this is going on right now. And right now, you pointed to this intensifying hurricane coming toward the Gulf Coast. But at the same time, we have once-in-a-thousand-year rainfalls in Central Europe, unprecedented fires in Portugal, unprecedented drought in Namibia, and I could keep going. It's happening all over the world. But frankly, the fact that it is global in its dimensions is one of the reasons it's hard for us as human beings to deal with it, because we're not used to thinking in that context. But now the relationship between humanity, as our civilization is currently organized, and the surprisingly fragile ecological systems of the planet are creating a worsening crisis. And the fact that the scientists have been proven exactly correct in what they predicted would happen today should cause us to listen more carefully to what they're warning us now of what will happen in the years ahead unless we stop using the sky as an open sewer. This thin shell of atmosphere around the planet, it's blue because that's where the oxygen is, but it's so thin if you could drive a car straight up in the air at highway speeds, you'd get to the top of that blue line in 5 to 7 minutes. You could walk it in an hour. And we're putting another 162 million tons of heat-trapping pollution into it every single day, using it as an open sewer, and it lingers there on average each molecule about 100 years. The true math, as you would know very, very well, is more complicated, but the average is about 100 years per molecule, so it builds up, and it traps as much extra heat every single day as would be released by 750,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every 24 hours on the Earth. It is insane for us to allow that to continue, particularly as we now see the manifestations of the crisis worsening every day. I do think we will get to a kind of a political gag point where people who have tried to ignore it and say, well, I'm not so sure, will get to the point where they say, whoa, wait a minute, my insurance is going up, as you point out, in Florida and California and in some other. The Economist had a cover story on a $25 trillion loss in the world's housing market just because of the climate crisis by mid-century unless we act. And the list goes on. We have got to respond with much greater alacrity.
It's as if you recited some of those facts before, but
you've
they're
written
serious.
About them.
Yes,
before.
I've written about them many times.
You know, this audience may not all have heard those facts before.
That's true. Also,
I want to point out that Kamala Harris grew up in a middle-class family also.
Thank you. I mean, I was thinking about how the theme of this year's Climate Week is it's time. Really? You know, like, it was time when you were in an elected office, multiple elected offices. It was time in 2007 when your first film came out. It was time when Sandy hit in 2012. it's just, it's kind of infuriating. But on the progress side, what encourages you on this issue? You and I have talked recently about the pace of renewable deployment. And there's clearly a lot of excitement. Climate Week is also more than 50% larger this year than last year, partly because of the IRA and its impacts. And I'm curious what gives you hope on this.
John, Kerry talked about China earlier. Let me give you one new statistic on China. From January 1 of this year through the end of July, China deployed as much new solar every month as would equal 18 new 1 gigawatt nuclear power plants every month. It's incredible. We in the United States doubled our deployment of solar last year as well. We are seeing a breakout victory by solar, cheapest electricity in the history of the world. We're now seeing very significant progress in the battery technologies that are extending the number of hours each day solar and wind electricity can be used. That is one of the reasons that I am hopeful. I'm optimistic. We're going to win this. But the question that remains is whether we will win it in time. We're in a race, and there are some negative tipping points that we need to avoid crossing over. One of them that's quite astonishing, and you've written about this as well, the Gulf Stream could shut down. Sounds like a bad science fiction. In fact, it was a science fiction movie in 2005, I think. But now you see these peer-reviewed scientific articles saying it could very well happen within 25 years. What? That's incredible. The scale of these consequences must cause us to change policy more quickly. But I'm hopeful because we have seen the beginnings of some very significant changes in policy. Now, we need to remove the anti-climate activity as much as we can. And President Lincoln, our greatest president, famously said that without the support of the people, nothing is possible. With the support of the people, everything is possible. I do believe you mentioned that years ago it was time. We should have done it back then. Of course, we should have. But if you look at this climate crisis and the largest grassroots movement in the history of the world to try to bring about solutions, it fits into a pattern of all the great morally based movements in our history. You look back at the abolition of slavery, the effort to get women equality, the right to vote and equality in all things, the civil rights and anti-apartheid movements, the LGBTQ movement. In all of those movements, people felt despair. The advocates got to a point where they said, oh, is this ever going to happen? But when the underbrush of argumentation was cleared away and the central issue was revealed as a choice between what's clearly right and what's clearly wrong, then at a very deep level, the outcome became foreordained. And then things really began to change. So that's the point we are approaching now. And by the way, there is a generational shift that is a real tailwind for those of us who have been pushing for this change. And we're seeing that in countries all around the world.
Well, we're out of time. I do like to end with one fun thing. You've been in the public eye for so long. What is one thing that you don't think most people know about you?
At this point, I'm not sure there's anything, boy, what is that? Let's see. I'm not sure that there's anything that I can...
Well, what was the last song you listened to?
Let me go back to your first question, because I think that most people don't know that I've got 1,000 solar panels installed on my farm.
That's true. That's true. From comments to our stories, I can tell you that is very true. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. And
thank you for what you do, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.